is a profound change from the world of our parents' generation, where the range of viable options available to individuals and to organisations was measurably smaller. During the second module of this program, I would like to suggest ways in which individuals and organisations might successfully respond to these trends. But first, I'd like to stop and invite your comments and feedback. What impact are these trends having on your life and inside your organisation? What other trends are you being confronted with which are also causing similar shifts?
Let's begin with the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone number or fax which appear on your screen. We'll remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. I guess we already have our first question from Medellin, Colombia. Go ahead, please.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días.
Nuestra
pregunta es la siguiente.
Good morning. Our question is,
acelerado de cambio y el desarrollo tecnológico cada vez más veloz.
the fastest pace,
de información que se produce hoy en día,
the more dynamic flow of information, and the greater offer that you need to offer makes it so that the employees need to be more specialized, but they're further removed from the authorities of the organizations. So how can the employees be prepared to respond to the increasing demands of the organizations?
Yes, we've seen over the last 200 years an increasing degree of specialisation expected of our employees, and we're now seeing very, very fine specialties being created inside organisations, and as people become more specialised, the need for them to work only in one organisation often changes, and so you find people who become very specialised end up being almost like contractors or consultants working to a number of organisations, and then it becomes very difficult for them to feel like they're part of one particular organisation. This is a challenge for both the organisation and the individual. The critical thing, though, it seems to me, is that this makes it absolutely essential that the organisation is clear about what business it's in and what it expects of its employees. And the greater clarity you get about that, the easier it is to then make sure that these specialists fit into the organisation structure that you have.
Great. Our next question is from Sabinas, Mexico. Go ahead, please.
Del Instituto Tecnológico de Estudios
From
Superiores de la Región Carbonífera de Sabinas, Coahuila,
Coahuila, Mexico. Our question is, how does it affect the use or not use of workforce with the introduction of Internet in Mexico?
Could you elaborate on that a little bit, please? The use or misuse of Internet?
Yes, I'm not sure of what you mean specifically by.
Yeah. What are the consequences can be seen for the future with the increasing use of Internet in Mexico in the workforce?
One of the challenges that we've seen in my part of the world as the Internet has spread beyond the developed countries into developing countries is the extent to which people are, first of all, becoming expected to deal with English because the language of the internet is often English, and this has significant impact on a cultural impact on countries. But the second thing is that information is much more readily and quickly available, and we certainly discover with young people their ability to take advantage of and use the internet as fast as it becomes available is just huge. I've done some work in China in recent times, and from a government point of view, the government's having great difficulty because of the spread of the internet and its immediate availability, and people are taking great advantage of the information that's available. It really is a challenge for those who are trying to keep control over information. I think the trick is to move away from thinking about keeping control to thinking about what it is you're attempting to get done through your business or your company, and using the internet as a tool to help that rather than trying to restrict access.
Which of course gets into more specialization because now you have more information available.
Exactly, that's right.
Our next question comes from Panama, the Technological University in Panama. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. We're from the Technological University of Panama, and our greetings to our Latin American fellow countries. Is it possible that the increasing needs for training of the workforce will lead to the Latin American countries that have younger populations to confusing situations because there's a lack of guidelines from the governments? Thank you.
Yeah, this is a significant challenge. It's a challenge in countries like Australia and America, but it's a particular challenge in some of the developing countries. There is so much information available that it is very difficult for anybody to decide in which direction ought we be going. There are now so many options available that it is very easy, and governments do this regularly, to set up panels and to investigate which way to go, and they take years and don't actually do anything. And so you could end up being paralysed by this. I think, again, the real challenge is for some brave people to say, no, this is what we're going to attempt to do, and then to remain focused on where it is you want to go, and use this technology to your advantage, rather than saying there's so much out there, I must sit back and wait and then decide where it's going to take me.
Absolutely. And our next question is from the United States, Boeing Corporation in Seattle, Washington. Go ahead, please.
Hi. My question is that you asked about different trends, and we find in some areas of Boeing that we must now be our own salesperson or our own marketing reps for our professional careers in order to keep our jobs. Do you have any suggestions for how we can learn these skills? Because we're not all professional marketers, and we're having to compete in some areas against our own team members.
Yes, a most profound challenge. And again, like many of these challenges, it's a greater challenge for those of us who are a little older than it is, hopefully, for those who are a little younger. I know in my country, from senior high school into universities, these sorts of skills are now forming part of curriculum. Certainly when I was at school, marketing and sales skills were not anything that I was taught. And for those of us of my age, it is a very difficult challenge, but younger people find it easier. It seems to me that the fundamental requirement here is to get a strong sense of who you are as a person. And if you can have that robust sense of yourself, then the ability to promote that is a little easier. But I think those of us who are a little older are just going to have to reinvent ourselves a little quicker than the young people. But it's definitely a challenge we all face.
Okay. I'm not quite sure where the next question is coming from. Would you repeat that, please? Tecamachaco, please go ahead, please.
Good morning. Our question is, in the new reality of the global marketplace, what is the role of unions and the defense of workers?
Yes. I come from a country in which unions have had a strong role historically. 30 years ago in Australia, more than half of the workforce was a member of a trade union. That's been challenged in recent times and the union membership is dropping. But I think there is a need for unions, like everybody else, to rethink their role. In my country, for example, unions have had great difficulty in dealing with unemployed people. They have seen their role as providing support to employed people, and as their members have lost jobs, they haven't known what their role is. I think there's a challenge there for unions to recognise that they also are in the continuous learning business. The second issue for unions, it seems to me, is to recognise that their role goes beyond workplace legislation or conditions of employment, and it does go into management or assisting people in the management of all of their lives. And I think unions do have a great role in educating their members, both in workplace realities but also in other life skills. And if they can position themselves in the lives of their members in that way, then people will want to stay a member of a union, and then the workplace consequences, the conditions and improvements that unions have traditionally been associated with will also continue to flow.
Thank you. We go back to Mexico, to National Polytechnic Institute.
Good morning. I am from the Continuing Education Secretary, and my question is, there is a gap between training for the graduates of a developing country and the needs from corporations, multinational corporations. What are they doing, the multinational corporations, to solve this problem?
I hope that what you're seeing is changing. 20 years ago, multinational corporations did see themselves as being responsible for recreating their operations in whichever country they went. I worked for a German company for many years, and it's how we do things in Germany. This is how we do things in Australia and America and wherever else they operated. I think in the last 20 years, multinational corporations, at least the intelligent ones, have come to see that that is a route to failure and to disaster. And what they have started to say is, let's bring our expertise into developing countries and let's work with the people we find there. Let's work with the conditions we find there. Let's work with the culture we find there and create something that works in that country. And I think that the best multinational corporations are doing that. And that way, there is a genuine role for graduates in the developing countries in actually shaping the way in which multinational corporations operate.
Great. We stay in Mexico, but now we go to Latin American Technological Institute. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm calling from Instituto Tecnológico Latinoamericano.
Latin American Technological Institute.
Pachuca Hidalgo. I work at a teacher training program for in-service teachers
training
for the public school system. And I would like to know how he would deal with the rejection that we found in this environment, the rejection towards these trends, considering that he was a school teacher also.
Yes, you're right, I was a school teacher and I'm still very heavily involved in schools in my own country and education, because I consider them to be critical in this whole process. And one of the big challenges for educational institutions is that many of the people involved in them have never been anywhere else. They went to school as a student, and then they went to university as a student, and then they went back to a school as a teacher. And their experience has been fairly limited, and this means that they tend to replicate the experience that was their experience as a student. And I think that enlightened schools are pushing their teachers and their administrators out into the real world much more, and then bringing them back again. And I've certainly found in my own life I'm much better now in my work with students at school because I've spent 20 years of my life since I left teaching. I can now bring a range of skills I didn't have before.
Absolutely. For our next question, we go to Lima, Peru. Go ahead, please.
Hello, from Ricardo Palma University. Could you elaborate on the concept of corporate responsibility in relation to improving quality of life and training of professionals?
Yes, once upon a time, corporations saw their responsibility as only between 9 and 5 on Monday to Friday. And they said to their employees, come into the office at 9 o'clock and then go home at 5, and what you do outside those times is your own business. They've found that that doesn't work. Employees live whole lives, and if they ask their employees to divide their lives into bits, it creates all sorts of problems. It also creates problems for the corporation because it means it doesn't understand its marketplace as well as it should. So the most enlightened corporations now are starting to say that they ought to embed themselves in the lives of their employees and also in the communities in which they operate, so that they feel much more a whole part, and then they can bring whatever service or whatever product they are selling into people's lives, rather than expecting people to take only a part of their life out for the work that they do. It's a real challenge, but it's definitely happening.
Great. Thank you for your questions. Let's now move to the second module for our program.
Thank you for your comments, questions and feedback. In this part of my presentation, I want to make specific comments about how individuals, companies and institutions, and societies and governments might successfully respond to the changing workplace, which is being inspired by an increasingly global marketplace. I'd like to start with the last of my 4 trends, the changing nature of information. With information arriving rapidly and from many different sources, which seems to be the norm today, how do we know which information we should take seriously and what we should ignore? If we are to successfully reinvent ourselves in ways our modern world seems to require, then being able to distinguish a piece of interesting but unimportant information from a significant and meaningful trend is critical. Such analytical ability has always been in the arsenal of most successful people, but it is increasingly also demanded in all of us. Some of the ways in which successful people are able to identify and take advantage of important information which could easily be lost in noise include noticing if a particular message is being repeated, either because it arrives from multiple sources or because it recurs over time. Chances are, if it's repeated, it's important. Observing if others appear to be responding to particular pieces of information. Alert individuals can take advantage of useful information by observing the actions and reactions of others, even if they didn't notice it in the first place. Experimenting by responding to something which seems important and seeing if anything happens. The reverse is also possible, doing nothing in response to a message and being alert to what happens or doesn't happen. Successful people also talk things through with their mentors, trusted peers, or an inner circle of advisors. And this is actually an extremely important point. A particularly prevalent myth in our modern world is that of the ruggedly heroic individual who is successful because they have beaten the odds on their own. Someone who's made it through hard work and personal endeavour. The media perpetuates this myth with stories both of successful entrepreneurs and battlers who have risen beyond anyone's expectation. I've probably been guilty of reinforcing this myth when I noted earlier that the changing world of work was requiring each of us to take greater control over our life's direction and to chart a course which works for each of us individually. There is, of course, some truth in this. Each of us does ultimately have to chart our own course if we are to be successful. But to suggest that we should or could do this alone is simply ridiculous. Even the most independent individual acknowledges the help of an inner core of people who have been with them every step of the way. These people have been mentor, conscience, forward scout, psychotherapist, muse or friend. Without them, not only wouldn't success have arrived, but even if it did, it wouldn't have meant much. My favourite example is Richard Branson, who is dyslexic and still doesn't even know his times tables. Yet he has been able to take on some of the most powerful companies and governments in the world and win. Read his book, Losing My Virginity, and see just how important a trusted circle of friends and advisors has been in his tremendous success. The modern world might be placing increasing responsibility on each of us for making our own lives work. But that doesn't mean we need to do it on our own. The exact opposite is true. Now, more than ever, we need friends and advisors to help us get where we're going and to share the success when we get there. Which leads me to say something about the role of companies and institutions in helping people make sense of the information which is bombarding them. First, to educational institutions. Right from preschool to tertiary education, and including corporate training departments, there is a need to move from teaching stuff to helping people learn to think for themselves, to analyse, to discriminate, to decide, and to reflect. This is not a new need, and there is now a plethora of curriculum material available on thinking skills and decision making. The fact that this is not in wider use reflects an innate conservatism in education systems which can no longer be excused. Virtually all the information anyone needs to do anything is now instantly available. Once, much of it was only in the heads of teachers and professors, but not anymore. What is in much shorter supply is people who know how to use this information to their own advantage. And that is a skill which can and should be taught from an early age. Educational institutions have in fact a special place as we create our future world. By their very nature, they and the people who are attracted to them are at the forefront of new knowledge and skill. Educators are, or ought to be, among those who are the most often confronted with new information or perspectives to challenge their current worldview. The notion of reconversion should be very familiar to those who are in the business of education and learning. However, too often their organisations are inflexible and are not creative enough to permit their employees and their students to experiment and explore new ideas. I'm very encouraged in my home country to see